Well, that's done. For 2021, we had the post-New Jedi Order Post-Mortem. And now, for 2023, we have the post-New Jedi Order Post-Mortem. In a way, I find these harder to do than book reviews because for book reviews, at least you're just looking at one book and what I liked, what I didn't like, the characters, the plot, the elements, how I feel like the series is working overall. But for these post-mortems or retrospectives or whatever I decide to call them, I have to look at 20 plus books and somehow sum up my thoughts as a whole, which always ends up taking me much longer than I expect. So am I glad that I finally read the post-New Jedi Order novels? Yes, I am. I felt like they were something that wasn't wearing on me or hanging over my head in any way, but I did want to see the books through to their conclusion. I liked where the Unifying Force left off, and the first go around, I was definitely not pleased with the direction of the Legacy of the Force series, so I thought, okay, it's been years, let's give it a second shot. Since you have to do book reviews on these, you have to finish them this time. And it led me to read books that I never even experienced the first go around. So yes, I am glad that I finally read them all. Did I enjoy them though? That's a bit more complicated. Part of what I love so much about the Star Wars novels is how subjective they are. That there could be a book that is perfectly fine, it's serviceable, and people who are not me may absolutely love it. For instance, I know that there are people out there who love the Legacy of the Force series, who love the direction it took, who found it gripping and enthralling, and their absolute favorite Star Wars novels. I am not one of those people. And I think part of that comes down to me, from the start, not agreeing with the direction that they chose to take Jacen's character in. At the end of the Unifying Force, Jacen was going to set off on a 5-year Force pilgrimage. He wanted to travel the galaxy, he wanted to learn more about other Force traditions, and he wanted to learn more about the Force and about himself. And we never got that story of where Jacen went. We only ended up seeing it after the fact through other people's eyes. In the very first book of the Dark Nest trilogy, we see Jacen leaving his Force pilgrimage, and we know that his last stop was with Akana and the Fallen Aussie. And in the Fate of the Jedi series, we see Luke and Ben Skywalker retracing some of the steps that he made in an attempt to understand his actions of the previous series. But we never actually saw any of that. We see a few flashbacks, we hear about people's interactions with him, but that was sort of left undeveloped. And I sort of wish that we had gotten that story. This seems like classic prime James Luceno territory to give us, almost like these short episodes or interludes of Jacen with each of the Force traditions, what he's learning along the way. And maybe if we had gotten that story, I would have bought Jacen's turn a little more. And I will say one thing, Jacen's turn is consistent from Dark Nest trilogy onwards. I just don't agree with it. I felt like in the New Jedi Order series, Jacen was so desperate to find his place in the galaxy, what the Force intended from him, and that took him to extremes. We have in Darktide Onslaught where he has a vision and he thinks that he's meant to free the slaves on Belkaden. That is not, in fact, true. He takes it to an opposite extreme in Balance Point where he has another vision of how the galaxy could tip so easily to evil. He hears a voice that is presumably Anakin Skywalker telling him to stand firm. And he decides that the most reasonable way to interpret that is that he should do nothing, he should not use the Force at all. This, of course, was one of the things I found most frustrating about Jacen. His absolute pig-headedness and inactivity at times. Now, in Jacen's defense, he got over that, and by the end of the New Jedi Order series, he really seemed to have learned that you can't dictate your role in the galaxy and how the Force wants to use you. You just have to be open to the Force, and that's how he's able to defeat Enemy in the end, is just he does something that maybe no other Jedi has been able to do to that extent, just fully opening himself up to the Force. And it does say at the end of the Unifying Force that that's something, a feeling that he will be chasing for the rest of his life. But to be honest, when I closed the Unifying Force, where I saw Jacen next was not so desperate to protect his secret child that he would try to take over the entire galaxy, which is very akin to Anakin Skywalker. A lot of that prequel trilogy trickling through. I actually saw Jacen as maybe having the opposite problem, that if anyone was likely to become a Force hermit, it was Jacen. And that I thought Jacen's dilemma going forward might be Jacen removing himself from the galaxy and from his family and friends and the events around him, and that maybe that was going to have to be his journey, that yes, follow the will of the Force, but you have to have ties and things holding you down or you just drift. That's not what happened with Jacen, and I think that's part of my issues with Dark Nest Trilogy and Legacy of the Force, is just that I think that the choices that Jacen makes, for the most part, are consistent and make sense. I just don't really understand that initial thing. I think it all boils down to, I don't think that Vergere was a Sith or working under a Sith agenda, and I don't think that what she taught Jacen shoved him down the downwards ramp to Sithdom in the dark side. But that's obviously what the authors of the Legacy of the Force books got from it, and that's the direction they took. Did Legacy of the Force keep my interest? Yeah, for the most part. I felt like a few of the books dragged a bit, but once things really started to percolate and boil up, it was really hard to put down. You just kept reading and reading and reading, and almost watching a train wreck in progress where you're just like, oh no, how much worse can it get? And there is a certain appeal to that, although I do find it draining at times, where I don't want to watch characters that I love and enjoy just making stupid or bad decisions over and over again, but that's a lot of the Legacy of the Force. Book number 5, Sacrifice, still made me immeasurably mad the second go around, but at least this time I was able to continue on and keep reading instead of just absolute closing the book, throwing against the wall, and like giving up. Does Mara make sense as the titular sacrifice though? No. I'm gonna say it. I still don't think Mara makes sense. I think that if Jacen had to sacrifice someone to become a Sith Lord, I think my initial idea of Ben or Alana or Tenel Ka makes way more sense, and in fact I think, I hate to say it, but you probably could have killed Tenel Ka off and it wouldn't have greatly affected the books. Well, that's a lie. I mean, the Hapen cluster probably would have descended into more kin infighting, and with Alana only being a small child, I'm not sure she would have been able to rise to power, but just Mara does not make sense. I feel like that is one thing I wish they would have dropped. I feel like the sacrifice was all about building intrigue, and you're like, oh my gosh, I gotta read the book, I gotta find out who it is. But then when it was revealed, the explanation we were given for it just didn't make sense. I will say though that I talked to Matt Wilkins, and he told me that he believes he heard this from Troy Denning, that the authors were trying to think of like why Luke wouldn't have intervened sooner, and the idea was that if Luke's wife died, he'd be consumed by grief and not thinking clearly, and that could drag the stuff out with Jacen a little longer. Yeah, probably. But I don't like that. I don't like that at all. And in fact, I'm going to say something radical here. I think that if they were 100% decided on killing Mara off, they should not have killed her in book number 5. Now, I can understand publication-wise why they chose to do that, because for the Legacy of the Force series, we had 3 authors. Each of them wrote 2 paperbacks and 1 hardcover release. And since they were doing 1, 5, and 9, Karen Travis's hardcover is number 5, and, sacrifice, and that's where Mara dies. But I think that Mara dying and then no one figuring out who killed her until book number 8 makes them look dim. I can buy the explanation that Luke's grief is leading him to not confront Jacen as soon as he probably should have and would have, but more for how it affects Ben's plot, which is that in book number 6, Ben is convinced that Jacen killed his mother, and he's going to pretend that he's still in league with Jacen so he can uncover information about whether Jacen killed his mother. And he's like ready to kill Jacen, and Luke stops him and it's like, it wasn't Jacen, it was Alema Rar. And I'm like, nah, that doesn't even make any sense. I mean, that's what they had decided in book number 6, but it doesn't even make any sense. And then book 7 is Ben just inactive, sitting there, sorting through his grief, sorting through his feelings. He and his father confront Jacen towards the end, but Jacen gets away again. And then book number 8, Revelation, is the one where Ben's like, I need to do an investigation. I need to figure out who killed Mom, because I don't think it was Alema Rar, and I need to prove it. And he, goes back to the scene of the crime, and he finds evidence, and he runs the evidence, and it proves that Jacen killed Mara. So then going into book 9, we have another motivation for why Jaina needs to take her brother out, which is that he killed his own aunt. But I feel like, I know that grief is a process, and you don't just wake up one day and you're like, I'm good now, I don't miss my mom, I'm over it. But I just feel like that's not the progression that I thought Ben would have taken. I would have almost expected Ben to be like book number 6. Ben, like Luke, is sort of trying to process what happened and, oh, Mom died? And then I almost would have combined the investigation with him being like, I'm gonna kill Jacen, into the same thing. Because I guess in my head it would make sense to me that you would have the incapacitated by grief stage, and then the I'm gonna investigate this and find out who did it stage, and then the it's Jacen, I'm gonna bloody murder him stage. And I don't really think that you need 3 books for that. So basically what I'm saying is that I would have pushed Mara's death later into the series instead of putting it at the halfway point. Again, that does, though, make it look like Luke and the Jedi Order don't want to confront Jacen for far too many books. And I don't want to say, like, I'm gonna take a book or 2 out of the Legacy of the Force series, but I don't know, I might tighten it up a little. Because especially if you consider the fact that Jacen's downward spiral started in the Dark Nest trilogy, that means we've got 12 books of Jacen just absolutely falling to the dark side and being an absolute edgelord about it. So on to Millennium Falcon. When I read Millennium Falcon at the time, I was like, it's okay. It's not my favorite. Nice change of pace though. I think my biggest issue with Millennium Falcon is Jadek, and how much Jadek takes over the story, and then also how unconclusive the ending is. But now that I've had like 6 months, probably more than 6 months, to stew on Millennium Falcon and reflect on Millennium Falcon, I wish we'd had more stories in this post-New Jedi Order era like Millennium Falcon, because I really like the stuff with Leia and Han and Alana. I like that they were retracing the Falcon's past. Wish we could have seen more of them doing that and less of Jadek. And I felt like it was just nice. It was a nice story. It wasn't dark. There was no torture. It was a little bit Forever Young in that we have this like almost cryogenically frozen man waking up out of the past. But I feel like Millennium Falcon did a lot more right than, let's say, Crucible did. So you may be saying, Meg, this is not a definitive post-New Jedi Order Post-Mortem because you skipped those 2 books about Jacen Core. I did. I skipped those 2 books about Jacen Core. I think they are Crosscurrent and Riptide. They are set in between Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi, and I skipped them basically for the same reason that I skipped the Legacy comic. I didn't have time to read them. And I sort of decided that if I was going to be reading 2 books about Jacen, maybe I should try to play the Jedi Academy game first. Although I will say, in the Jedi Academy game, you got to pick what Jacen looked like, and even is Jacen a man or a woman, and I would not have picked Jacen Core is a brown-haired white man. That's just sort of boring. Jacen could be a lady. Jacen could be an alien man. Like, stop picking the boring option. I skipped the Legacy comic for similar reasons. Not I had to replay a video game first because I wanted to. More that I added up how many trade paperback releases there were for Legacy and Legacy War and the Legacy Part 2 or whatever it's called, and that basically ended up being 15 trade paperbacks. So even if I read 1 a week, that was going to end up being almost 4 months of comic reviews. And again, there are not enough weeks in the year for that. So I put those to the side. I think I'd like at some point to do a comics heavy or comics only reread, because last year when I was doing the prequel era, I skipped the Republic comics. And I know there are like so many comics out there that I skipped, because basically at this point the only ones I've reviewed are Invasion, which was the New Jedi Order comic, and I have read some comics on my own in the past. I've read Dark Empire and its sequels and Crimson Empire and some stuff like that. But for the most part, comics were not really a realm that I delved into because I didn't have a local comic book store. The library in the town I grew up in didn't really buy comic books. So they're sort of like a untapped realm for me. I haven't really delved into them in any depth, but I would like to at some point. So that leads us on to the Fate of the Jedi series, which I'm gonna come right out and say, Fate of the Jedi series should not have been 9 books. I kept thinking it while I was reading it, like, this seems like filler. This seems like filler. Slave Uprising coming up out of nowhere in book 5. Absolute filler. And now that I've finished it and read all 9 books, yeah, I feel like at the most, Fate of the Jedi should have only been 6 books. One of Legacy of the Force's issues, I felt, was that it didn't always seem like the 3 authors were meshing together well, and I think that came through in the way that their favorite characters would pop up in their books and not really in the other 2 authors' books. So we have Karen Travis's fascination with Boba Fett, and the fact that Boba Fett, for the most part, only showed up in her 3 books. Now, he does show up in Invincible as well, but it would be like we'd have an Alston book, a heavy focus on Mandalore, and then a Denning book and like no mention of Mandalore at all. And even when we were dealing with non-Mandalorian characters in Karen Travis's book, people would make Mandalorian references, and then obviously in Alston and Denning's book they would not make any of those references, so they just didn't really seem to mesh that well together. If you're reading an Alston Legacy of the Force book, Wedge is probably gonna show up. If you're reading a Denning Legacy of the Force book, Tenel Ka will probably be in it. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, it just didn't always feel like the authors were working well together, and almost at times like they were at counter purposes. Like maybe not intentionally so, but you could definitely feel the divides between the books. So in Fate of the Jedi, I was pleased to find that Christie Golden, while not having a memorable style in the same way that Karen Travis did, at least sort of bridged the gap between Alston and Denning. But at the same time, the Fate of the Jedi series also saw a lot more continuity errors, which I think also adds to my why does this need to be 6 books? If you're rushing to put this out, that's not the right approach. How I would fix Legacy of the Force as it stands is by moving Mara's death further forward in the series. I mean, ideally, she would not have died at all, but that's another topic. How I would have fixed Fate of the Jedi is to make it 2 connected trilogies. The first one would have opened with Luke Skywalker is exiled by Dala, and he has to find out why Jacen fell to the dark side, and he and Ben leave, and then we don't hear them for the rest of the narrative. So instead, it would have been a lot of the political intrigue with Dala, and then I also think I would have added the Lost Tribe of the Sith in there as well, instead of having them take over Coruscant in book number 8 of 9, like maybe have them tinkering with things and trying to infiltrate into power more. And then the second trilogy would have picked up with Luke and Ben on their Force pilgrimage. Sure, they can encounter Abeloth, I don't care. They can pick up Vestara. And then maybe have the first trilogy end with the coup to overthrow Dala. And then the second trilogy end with the culmination of the Lost Tribe of the Sith and Abeloth stuff. But in the meantime, I would have cut out the slave uprising stuff. It just doesn't matter. We could have had the Jedi going mad in the first trilogy, and they don't have an answer with it, so it could have built up more of that. But again, I probably would have chosen... see, this is a fix. Reaching back to the Legacy of the Force books. The Jedi that go mad, I would have had them be characters in the Legacy of the Force series. And really, the only one we saw there was Valen Horn. But I realized, like, it was Fury or Revelation in Legacy of the Force where Kyle Katarn and some Jedi confront Jacen on Coruscant, and there's a female Bothan Jedi with them. Well, she's not the friend of Gisela that goes mad that we meet in Fate of the Jedi. So, like, just tighten that up a little. Make me care about the people who are going mad by introducing them earlier, by making them be a part of the story earlier. Would they have done this? Del Rey and Lucas books probably would not have wanted to have Luke and Ben unaccounted for like an entire trilogy, but I think that way would have built the suspense about what they're doing, what they're uncovering. Especially if they can't contact the Jedi and the Jedi can't contact them, then it's almost the Jedi having to face this crisis on their own without any input from Luke. And maybe we could have seen the Jedi Order coming into its own a little more, because as it stands in Fate of the Jedi, it really felt like Luke left them. They sort of fell apart. Luke had to come back and pick the pieces back up. And they're so dysfunctional. But they've been so dysfunctional for decades at this point, so that's not a new development at all. And then I think one minor change I probably would have done is that Fate of the Jedi ends in a somewhat disappointing manner for me, as opposed to the Unifying Force, where we really saw a lot of plot threads wrapped up and concluded, and it felt good to read that. In Apocalypse, the last book in the Fate of the Jedi series, a lot of stuff is left open-ended. I mean, even Abeloth is left open-ended. They may have defeated her for now, but that chaotic evil that drives her is still floating around out there. So in my re-tinkered 2-trilogy version of Fate of the Jedi, I would have had a much more definitive ending. I wouldn't have had this whole, oh, we gotta find the Dagger of Mortis so we can kill Abeloth for good. Like, just kill her for good. I'm done. I'm done. I don't want to see her anymore. Because I think that was almost one of Fate of the Jedi's problems for me, where we're not lacking in villains, but I don't know, they don't all totally work for me. Abeloth doesn't show up until book number 3. While the Lost Tribe of the Sith has been behaving like pirates for the past 2 years, they aren't a super big threat to the galaxy at large until book number 8. And Dala swings back and forth between being misguided, but you understand why, to just being straight up cardboard cutout villain. and she's overthrown, and then she's like, well, I'm going to take over the Empire now, and then Jag diffuses that pretty easily. So I don't know. Again, that's why I would probably do 2 separate trilogies, so we could have Dala in #1 and Abeloth in #2, and have the Lost Tribe of the Sith stretching through both of them, but culminating in the Abeloth trilogy. Also felt like Luke and Ben were given this directive: you have to go on this Force pilgrimage and figure out why Jacen fell, and they definitely gave up on that. As soon as they realized Abeloth, evil Force entity running around, oh no, they just completely stopped that. So again, maybe restricting it to 3 books could have made that a little more sustained. So, moving on to X-Wing Mercy Kill. Was it as good as the Race Squadron books? No. Did I still enjoy it? Yes, I did. I think, as with Millennium Falcon, this was a very nice change of pace after 18 books of just war and bad stuff. And I really wish we could have seen more stories with this Race Squadron 2.0, because a lot of it felt like setting them up, setting the characters up, and maybe if Aaron Alston had lived and if he had been offered the opportunity to write more books, we would have seen more books with them, and like the Race Squadron characters, they would have had their moments to shine in later books. But I enjoyed it. I liked Piggy's arc. I felt like it was a good one of saying that you may have lost people. You may have gone through terrible things, but that doesn't mean life is over and you can still have fun in the process. Although I'm still looking for a paperback copy, because the hardcover, when all the rest of my books are paperback, just feels weird to me, but maybe because this was one of the last books to be published, I'm finding it very hard to find a paperback copy that does not have the Legends banner on it, which I just prefer for aesthetic reasons. So anyway, I'm still on the hunt for that. And then finally, Crucible. If I said that what I love about Star Wars is how subjective it is, how, you know, one book someone could hate it and another person could love it, well, I'm gonna be objective here. I don't think Crucible's a very good book. I don't think it is. I don't think it really sets out what it aimed to do. I think it's really dark, really violent, really gross in parts. It also gets really, really weird. And I think there was an opportunity to have Luke and Leia and Han's final, for now, adventure, and have it be fun, and have it be inspiring, and have it, you know, heartwarming, and you can see why they'd want to hang up their hats at the end. But it seems like that's not what Troy Denning set out to do, that he was like, I'm gonna show you why they're gonna retire. They're gonna have to retire after this. Heh heh heh. I mean, maybe not the cackle. But, yeah. And I think having that be the last chronological book in the expanded universe continuity just really gets my goat, because I really wanted it to end on a high note. And for me, Crucible is not a high note. It's a low note. I think, too, the way that it diminishes Vestara's character, taking her from this complex girl, and you want her to turn out well, but you can see how much she's going up against to do so. And then you get to Crucible, and she's bad now. She's 100% bad now. There's no coming back from this. It sort of felt like a kick in the face to the Ben and Vestara shippers by saying there is absolutely no chance of them getting back together, whereas the sense I got from Fate of the Jedi was like, hey, gotta let some time pass. And I thought it very interesting that the visions that Ben and Vestara saw of themselves in, I think it was the Pool of Knowledge, showed that, like, hey, you know, maybe they end up being like an on again, off again. Maybe she's not totally, completely, forever against the Jedi and barred from the Jedi, that, like, they have different agendas, but she might work with Ben again. I don't know, I wasn't ready to rule Vestara out, and I feel like that's what Crucible did. So here's some random thoughts. I would be very interested to see, if it exists, the original treatment or idea for Legacy of the Force, because originally it was going to be like set in the Old Republic. I think that would have been really interesting. I would have liked to hear what their plans for that was. I also feel like if they wanted to tell a post-New Jedi Order story of a Jedi falling to the dark side and the Jedi Order having to rally together to take them down, like, it doesn't have to be Jacen. Why does it have to be Jacen? Like, why do Han and Leia constantly have to go through this kind of pain? They've lost Chewbacca. They lost Anakin. You're really gonna not just make them lose their other son, but have him fall to the dark side, become a Sith Lord, and his twin has to kill him. Really? Do they deserve that? They don't deserve that. Han and Leia only deserve the best. I rag a lot on the Bantam era books because there's a lot of crazy stuff in there. But Anakin and Jacen never would have died in the Bantam era books, and sometimes I just imagine a past where that happened, where the Skywalker Solo family are happy and nothing bad ever happens to them. You're probably going to say, Meg, you're reading books called Star Wars. It's about wars in the stars. I know, shut up, okay? This is why this is my silly little fantasy of just a happy alternate universe where Mara didn't die, Anakin didn't die, Jacen didn't die, Tahiri didn't try to molest a child, and just they're all happy and they all live happily ever after. And throwing that in there, in my happy alternate universe, Tenel Ka does not become Queen of Hapes. I don't know, she and Jacen start a animal sanctuary somewhere, probably on Dathomir. Because it just felt like, while the New Jedi Order set the precedent of no one is safe, bad things can happen to anyone, the subsequent books were like, well, that's the status quo. That's just how we operate going forward. And it's almost like you can't roll back to the Bantam era of, like, bad things don't happen to the main characters and their family because we've already set that precedent with Chewbacca and Anakin, and so we just get more deaths and they make me sad. I think that's why in the end, while I'm glad that I finally finished the Legacy of the Force series and read for the first time the Fate of the Jedi series, I'm not sure if I will ever revisit these. I feel like the Star Wars books that I do revisit, I do so for the characters and also for some, like, emotional moments in there. Like, there's a reason why I have read Starfighters of Adjumar probably more than any other Star Wars book I own, and that's just because I want to see those X-Wing guys being goofy. I want to see Wedge reconcile with Ayala, and I want to see Wedge save the day and make everything work out. It's one of those books that when you're feeling down, you pick it up and it puts a smile on your face. And I'm not sure that any of the Legacy of the Force or Fate of the Jedi series would do that for me, and certainly Crucible does not do that for me. Maybe Millennium Falcon. Maybe that'd be one where I'd revisit the Han and Alana and Leia portions because it is nice to see those family interactions. And I'll definitely revisit X-Wing Mercy Kill. But yeah, do you like pain? Do you like laying in a puddle on the floor? That's Legacy of the Force for you. I must feel, for me, that from the New Jedi Order series onwards, it's a bit of diminishing returns. New Jedi Order had such high highs, but also had things that absolutely did not work for me. Legacy of the Force was gripping at times, but I just don't like the direction it took with Jacen. And Fate of the Jedi, as I said, too many books. Just like too little butter on toast, like you're trying to scrape it and get it to cover everything and it just won't. Really could have done with some judicial editing there. So thanks so much for joining me for my 2023 reread/read in some cases. I loved getting to hear people's thoughts, even though I am very bad at replying to comments, but I do read comments, although I was sort of filtering myself for these books because, especially for Fate of the Jedi, I didn't want to be spoiled, so I was like sort of reading the comments later, but I appreciate every comment and everyone who commented. You guys bring up such interesting point of views and have, you know, outlooks on the books that I have never even considered. And if you're reading them with me, that's so cool. Really appreciate that. 2023 was an interesting year for me. I continued to do theater. Then I went to Japan with my sister, and that was a lot of fun. And for 2024, I'm going to be rereading. Well, here's the thing. I don't quite have a title yet. If anyone has something very catchy, please let me know, because right now I am calling it Clone Wars Take 2, but that's not entirely accurate. It's like half Clone Wars novels, so Republic Commando, and then the Clone Wars novels that were written by Karen Traviss and Karen Miller. And then the other half is like inner trilogy or original trilogy stories. So we have Death Star and Allegiance and Choices of One, and Luke Skywalker in the Shadows of Mindor, and the Coruscant Nights trilogy. But then also, because I've never read them before and I'm sort of interested to read them, I also have the Darth Bane trilogy thrown in there by Drew Karpyshyn. So yeah, if you have a good catchy title for this, please let me know. And finally, I've been thinking maybe it'd be fun to have a monthly live stream. Am I 100% taking this from Matt Wilkins? Yes, I am. However, Matt does it like late at night, and I am not a night owl. Let me know your thoughts. Right now I was thinking maybe one of the Sunday nights where I don't upload a review, so either the first or the third, having like a live stream. I'll probably do something, so I have something to do with my hands, whether that's coloring in my Star Wars coloring book or playing like a retro Star Wars game. But then I also think that would be a good opportunity, since I am a terrible comment replier, that if you have questions you want to ask me, or you want to get like book recommendations or something like that, that might be a good venue for it. Second thing to ponder, and if you have any ideas, let me know down in the comments. So thanks so much for joining me in 2023 for the Post-New Jedi Order reread. I will be back the first Sunday in February with the little, synopsis intro video. And then the second Sunday in February, I will be reviewing the first book in the Republic Commando series by Karen Traviss, Hard Contact.